Well, a person looking at you would never know you had a facelift.
Oh, honestly?
No, you never know.
Absolutely. Nobody could ever tell.
Not in a million years. Nobody in the world would ever know you'd had a facelift, Viv.
Vivian!
My God, you had a facelift.
From Emmy-banned pranks to Star Wars cantinas, the groundbreaking 1970s sitcom Maude hid some truly bizarre secrets behind its controversial episodes. Before Bea Arthur became Dorothy Zbornak, her feminist alter ego navigated Emmy scandals, geographic impossibilities, and a small Connecticut town that became unexpectedly famous. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Maude. Fact 1. The pants-dropping Emmy-banned.
Well, hello, you must be Mrs. Evans. I hope you didn't have any trouble finding us.
Oh, no, ma'am. I heard you all the way from the bus stop.
Picture this. It's the 1974 Emmy Awards, a glamorous night celebrating the best of television, and Bill Macy, who played Walter Findlay on Maude, decides to pull off what he thought was a harmless prank. According to Rue McClanahan's autobiography, My First 5 Husbands and the Ones That Got Away, as well as various interviews from people who witnessed it, Macy actually dropped his trousers right there at the ceremony and shouted out a raunchy joke to the entire audience. This wasn't exactly out of character for Macy, who apparently had a reputation for pulling this kind of stunt from time to time, but doing it at the Emmy Awards was taking things to a whole new level. The National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences was not amused in the slightest. Their response was swift and severe. They told Norman Lear and the producers of Maude that the show would no longer be eligible for any Emmy Awards for the entire duration of its run. This meant that one impulsive moment of what Macy considered comedy essentially banned an entire groundbreaking television series from one of the industry's most prestigious awards. The show had already been making waves with controversial episodes about abortion and alcoholism, but it was a pants-dropping incident that got them kicked out of Emmy contention. There was one notable exception to this ban, though. In 1977, Bea Arthur managed to win the Emmy for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series, becoming the only person from Maude to receive the award after the ban went into effect. The show continued airing until 1978, but thanks to Macy's memorable prank, it would never again compete for television's most coveted honors. Fact 2. Doris Roberts got fired before appearing.
Carol is going out with a 70-year-old man.
He's not 70 years old. Mother, you can age a man faster than any woman I know.
I'll drink to that.
Doris Roberts, who would later become famous as the meddling mother Marie Barone on Everybody Loves Raymond, was actually the first choice to play Vivian Harmon on Maude, but she got replaced before ever appearing on screen in what has to be one of the most awkward casting decisions in television history. Roberts herself told the story in an interview with the Archive of American Television, explaining that she got a call from Los Angeles about Bea Arthur's new show, Maude, and was asked if she could come out to California for the role. The problem was that Roberts was in the middle of a summer stock production and couldn't just leave, so she asked if she could find someone to replace her in the play, and the producers gave her some time to work it out. Roberts managed to arrange everything and flew out to Los Angeles for the role. But then something strange happened during the rehearsal process. Producer Rod Parker came to her hotel room and delivered some devastating news, telling her, "Honey, we made a mistake." When Roberts asked what he meant, Parker explained that she was like a little Bea Arthur, meaning her comedic style was too similar to the show's star. The producers realized they needed someone who could provide a different energy and contrast with Arthur's performance, not someone who mirrored it. Norman Lear approached Rue McClanahan during the taping of an All in the Family episode called The Bunkers and the Swingers in 1972, asking her to take on the role as a late replacement for Roberts. McClanahan accepted, and the rest is television history, as she would go on to play Vivian for the show's entire run before later reuniting with Bea Arthur on The Golden Girls. Fact 3. Bea Arthur sang in a Star Wars cantina. In 1978, fresh off her success on Maude, Bea Arthur made one of the most bizarre career choices imaginable by appearing in the now infamous Star Wars Holiday Special, where she played a bartender named Ackmena, who worked the night shift at the Mos Eisley Cantina. This was the same cantina from the original Star Wars film, where Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi first met Han Solo and Chewbacca. But this time it was filled with singing and dancing instead of blaster fire and shady deals. Arthur was invited to appear on the special by Ken and Mitzi Welch, who were composers for the show and friends of hers. They had written a song called Goodnight But Not Goodbye, specifically for her to perform, though Arthur later admitted in interviews that she wasn't really into the whole Star Wars thing and didn't fully understand what she was getting herself into. In the segment, her character Ackmena has to deal with rowdy alien customers, including an amorous patron played by Harvey Korman. And when the Galactic Empire imposes a planet-wide curfew, she needs to get everyone to leave the cantina. To accomplish this, she starts singing her farewell song while the cantina band, Figrin Dan and the Modal Nodes, plays along, causing all the aliens to literally waltz out the door. The shoot was incredibly grueling, lasting a full 24 hours straight, with costumed actors enduring extreme heat and some even needing oxygen to avoid passing out in their elaborate alien costumes. Arthur's son, Daniel Sachs, visited the set and witnessed a nurse running around feeding oxygen to various aliens to keep them from fainting, which gives you an idea of just how intense the production was. Fact 4. The abortion episode aired before Roe v. Wade.
Vivian, at age 62, I'll be the mother of an Eagle Scout. Do you know what that means? That means that I live in a house where an uncle is about to inherit his nephew's potty seats.
In a two-part episode titled Maude's Dilemma that aired on November 14th and 21st of 1972, the show tackled the subject of abortion in a way that had never been done on primetime television before, with 47-year-old Maude discovering she was unexpectedly pregnant and ultimately deciding to terminate the pregnancy. What makes the timing so remarkable is that this aired a full 2 months before the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision in January of 1973, which would make abortion legal nationwide, meaning Maude was addressing this controversial topic while it was still illegal in many states across the country. The initial broadcast was carried by all but 2 of CBS's nearly 200 affiliates and attracted nearly 7,000 letters of protest. But the real controversy exploded when the network decided to rerun the episodes in August of 1973. By this time, the United States Catholic Conference had organized a full campaign against the episodes, and the backlash was intense. Nearly 40 affiliates chose not to air the reruns at all, and not a single corporate sponsor would buy commercial time during those episodes, forcing CBS to broadcast them without any sponsorship. The network received more than 17,000 letters of protest about the reruns alone. The episodes were written by Susan Harris, who would later work with Bea Arthur again on The Golden Girls. And the story originally came about because a group called Zero Population Growth had announced a $10,000 prize for comedies that addressed population control. The writers initially considered storylines about vasectomies, but then someone suggested the late-in-life pregnancy and abortion angle, which Norman Lear approved, despite knowing it would cause controversy. Fact 5. The opening credits go the wrong direction.
I cannot believe a person would push a perfect stranger out of the way, step on her hand, and give her an elbow to the forehead just for a Batman hat. But I did it anyway.
The opening title sequence of Maude contains a geographic error so glaring that anyone familiar with New York geography would immediately notice something was completely wrong, yet it remained unchanged throughout the show's entire 6-year run. The sequence begins with an aerial shot of New York City including the Chrysler Building, and then shows what's supposed to be the drive from Manhattan to Maude's home in Tuckahoe, a real town in Westchester County. The problem is that the car in the opening credits is actually heading in the completely opposite direction from where Tuckahoe is located. The first travel shot was filmed on the old West Side elevated highway heading downtown, which means south, when Tuckahoe is actually north of Manhattan in Westchester County. Then, to make matters even more confusing, the next shot shows the car crossing the George Washington Bridge, which connects Manhattan to New Jersey on the western side of the city. If you were actually trying to get to Tuckahoe from Manhattan, you would need to drive north through the Bronx, not south, and then west into an entirely different state. The reason for this bizarre routing likely comes down to simple economics and visual appeal. The producers probably used old stock footage they had sitting around rather than spending money to film. New aerial shots specifically for the show, and the George Washington Bridge shot was visually more interesting than just showing another highway scene. The footage conveyed the general idea of leaving the city and entering the suburbs, which was apparently good enough for the people putting the credits together, even if it made absolutely no sense geographically. For anyone who knew New York, watching that opening sequence must have been a source of constant amusement or frustration. Fact 6. 1950s cars in a 1970s show. If you watch the opening credits of Maude carefully, you'll notice something odd about the cars driving along the highways in what's supposed to be footage from the 1970s. Most of them are actually vintage vehicles from the 1950s, which would have been completely out of place on American roads by the time the show premiered in 1972. Although the sequence is meant to show a contemporary journey from New York City to the suburbs where Maude lives, the footage features far more cars from 2 decades earlier than you would realistically expect to see on the road during that era. This anachronistic detail wasn't some artistic choice or nostalgic nod to the past, but rather a simple matter of cost-cutting and convenience in television production during that time period. Norman Lear and his production company likely had old stock footage sitting in their archives from previous projects or purchased it cheaply from film libraries, and they decided to use what they already had rather than spending money to rent helicopters and film crews to capture new aerial shots of highways with contemporary vehicles. In the early 1970s, television production operated on a good enough philosophy where networks and producers didn't worry too much about these kinds of details, assuming that most viewers wouldn't notice or care about such inconsistencies. This same approach was used for All in the Family and other Norman Lear productions, where grainy stock footage was regularly repurposed without much concern for whether it matched the show's actual time period. The thinking was that the footage served its basic purpose of establishing location and setting, and since everyone understood it was just television make-believe anyway, there was no reason to spend extra money on perfect accuracy. Fact 7. A real town was named after the maid.
Shall I take the tissue, ma'am, and put it in the guest bathroom?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Nugget.
Not at all. Bottoms up.
When Norman Lear needed a name for Maude's second housekeeper, the elderly and somewhat vulgar British woman who replaced Florida Evans in 1974, he chose the surname Naugatuck simply because he found the name of the real town in Connecticut amusing. The character of Mrs. Nell Naugatuck, played by British actress Hermione Baddeley, became known for her excessive drinking, compulsive lying, and frequent sparring matches with Maude that were just as popular with audiences as Florida's earlier conflicts with her boss had been. What makes this story even more interesting is that the real town of Naugatuck, Connecticut, ended up embracing their unexpected connection to the popular television show in a wonderfully warm way. Due to the popularity of Maude and the character who bore their town's name, Hermione Baddeley actually visited Naugatuck in the late 1970s and was given an official welcome ceremony right on the town green. The residents clearly appreciated the attention their small Connecticut town was getting from being featured on one of television's most talked about sitcoms, even if it was just through a character's surname. The name Naugatuck itself is actually of Native American origin rather than English, which adds another layer of irony to Norman Lear choosing it for a British character. Lear had a talent for finding humor in unexpected places, and the fact that a Connecticut town name struck him as funny enough to use for a character shows the kind of playful creative choices that went into making the show. Mrs. Naugatuck remained on Maude until 1977, when her character married Bert Beasley and moved to Ireland to care for his mother. Fact 8. The catchphrase came from Bea Arthur.
Have you been crying?
No, I have a black eye.
I think she's having an affair.
One of the most memorable lines from the entire series, Maude's signature catchphrase, "God'll get you for that, Walter," wasn't something the writers came up with at all, but actually came directly from Bea Arthur herself. Whenever Maude and her fourth husband Walter would get into one of their many arguments throughout the show's run, Maude would often deliver this line as her final word on the matter, and it became so associated with the character that fans could anticipate it coming during heated moments between the couple. The fact that this catchphrase originated with Arthur rather than being scripted shows how much of her own personality and natural way of speaking she brought to the role of Maude Findlay. Arthur had a gift for delivering cutting remarks with perfect timing, and this particular phrase captured both the character's frustration with her husband and her tendency to invoke a higher power when she felt she was losing an argument. It was the kind of line that could be both funny and slightly threatening at the same time, suggesting that even if Maude couldn't win the argument herself, divine intervention would eventually prove her right. The writers clearly recognized what a perfect fit this line was for the character and incorporated it into the show regularly, turning what might have been an improvised moment or a suggestion from Arthur into one of the defining elements of the series. It's a reminder that some of the best moments in television come not from what's written on the page, but from the actors themselves bringing their own instincts and authenticity to their characters, creating something that resonates with audiences in ways that purely scripted material sometimes cannot achieve. Fact 9. A 22-minute solo performance episode.
Arthur invited Walter here tonight.
Walter?
Walter. Maud, you're Walter.
Well, I certainly didn't think you meant Mrs. Cronkite's Walter.
In Season 4, Episode 9 of Maude, titled The Analyst, but sometimes referred to as Maude Bears Her Soul, Bea Arthur delivered what has to be one of the most impressive acting performances in sitcom history by performing a 22-minute monologue as the only actor visible on screen for the entire episode. The episode aired on November 10, 1975, and featured Maude lying on a psychiatrist's couch, pouring out her innermost feelings to an unseen therapist whose voice we occasionally hear, but whose face we never see. During this solo performance, Arthur's character revealed deep anxieties about her life, including her complicated feelings about her dead father, her resentment toward her mother, and her fear of turning 50 years old. The monologue was so compelling and emotionally honest that many viewers found themselves moved to tears as Maude worked through childhood memories and long-buried emotions, eventually reaching a kind of breakthrough about why she pushes people away before they have a chance to reject her. Arthur seamlessly moved between comedy and drama, showcasing the full range of her abilities as a performer, from her impeccable comedic timing to her capacity for delivering serious, non-melodramatic emotional moments. This episode demonstrated that Maude could be more than just a topical sitcom dealing with controversial issues, but could also deliver legitimate dramatic television when the material called for it. The episode received Emmy nominations for both writing and directing, recognizing the ambitious nature of what the show had attempted. for a 30-minute sitcom to dedicate an entire episode to a single actor performing what was essentially a one-person play was virtually unheard of at the time. Fact 10. John Wayne made a cameo as himself.
Do you know what happens when John Wayne visits a neighborhood?
Yes, Arthur. Stagecoach holdups fall off 50%.
In the Season 3 premiere episode titled Maude Meets the Duke, which aired on September 9, 1974, conservative Hollywood legend John Wayne appeared as himself in what was probably one of the most unlikely guest appearances in the show's history. The episode centered around Wayne visiting the town of Tuckahoe as part of a publicity tour for a new movie, with a scheduled stop at the home of Dr. Arthur Harmon, who had been sending fan letters to Wayne for years and was his #1 fan. The plot takes a turn when the ceiling caves in at the Harmon house, forcing Arthur to convince Maude to host the event at her place instead. Maude, being the outspoken liberal feminist that she was, decides she is going to have a verbal showdown with the Duke about women's liberation and other political issues where their views couldn't be more different. She prepares herself for what she imagines will be an intellectual battle of wills between her progressive politics and his well-known conservative stance on just about everything. However, when John Wayne actually arrives and Maude comes face-to-face with the legendary actor, all her preparation and all her plans for a political debate completely fall apart. Instead of the confident, argumentative Maude we know from every other episode, she becomes completely tongue-tied and starstruck, unable to follow through with any of her intentions to challenge him. It's a moment of unexpected vulnerability for a character who usually never backs down from a fight, and it showed that even someone as opinionated and fearless as Maude could be reduced to speechlessness when meeting a true Hollywood icon. Fact 11. 2 different Carols in the pilot.
You're upset because I'm dating a fellow who's a couple of years younger than me?
11. Carol, what can you possibly have in common with a boy who isn't even as old as your car?
When Maude first appeared as a character in the March 1972 backdoor pilot episode of All in the Family, which was essentially setting up the premise for her own series, the role of her daughter Carol was played by actress Marcia Rod. However, when Maude premiered as its own show in September of that same year, viewers would have noticed that Carol suddenly looked completely different, because the role had been recast with Adrienne Barbeau, who would go on to play the character for the show's entire run. The reason for this recasting came down to a fundamental difference in how the two actresses approached the character. Marcia Rod, who was primarily a theater actress, reportedly decided not to join the spin-off series, which opened the door for Adrienne Barbeau to take over. However, Bea Arthur was quoted as saying that she actually would have preferred to have Marcia Rod continue playing Carol throughout the entire series because she felt Rod's portrayal was harder-edged and tougher, while she regarded Barbeau's version of Carol as being too soft for what the character should have been. This disagreement over the character's interpretation highlights the different visions people had for how Carol should fit into the Maude household dynamic. Interestingly, Marcia Rod did eventually appear on Maude again, but not as Carol. During the show's final season, she guest-starred as a completely different character in an episode called Walter's Temptation, which must have been somewhat surreal for viewers who remembered her as the original Carol from the All in the Family pilot episode just a few years earlier. Fact 12. Norman Lear's favorite show.
The reason those kids picked on me is because they knew I was better than they were.
Which also explains why now nobody picks on you.
Norman Lear created some of the most groundbreaking and successful television shows in history through his production company, including All in the Family, Sanford and Son, The Jeffersons, One Day at a Time, and Good Times. But despite this incredible roster of hit shows that changed television forever, Lear himself considered Maude to be his personal favorite from everything his company had produced. This is a remarkable statement, considering that All in the Family was not only the #1 show in America for 5 consecutive years, but also revolutionized what sitcoms could be and say on television. The character of Maude Findlay was reportedly loosely based on Norman Lear's then-wife, Frances, which might help explain his special attachment to the show. There was clearly something personal about Maude for Lear that went beyond the cultural impact or rating success of his other programs. The show allowed him to explore issues and perspectives through a strong female character in ways that All in the Family, which focused on Archie Bunker's working-class conservative viewpoint, simply couldn't address in the same way. Maude gave Lear the opportunity to tackle topics like abortion, alcoholism, depression, and women's liberation from a different angle, using a character whose political beliefs were much closer to his own than Archie Bunker's ever were. The show was unapologetically liberal and feminist at a time when those perspectives were still relatively rare on television, and it starred a middle-aged woman as its central character, which was almost unheard of in sitcoms of that era. For Lear, creating a show that could be both funny and socially conscious while centering a strong, opinionated woman clearly held special significance. Fact 13. Conrad Bain got different strokes as a deal.
Morning, everybody. Where's the new boss lady?
Are we still in time to wish our lady executive luck?
Plenty of time. She's upstairs slipping into a new stomach.
Conrad Bain played Dr. Arthur Harmon, Maude's stuffy Republican neighbor, and Walter's best friend for the entire 6-year run of the show from 1972 to 1978, and his steady presence as a supporting character earned him something quite valuable from the producers. According to reports, the producers made a specific agreement with Bain that promised to star him in his own television series once Maude came to an end, which directly resulted in him being cast as the adult lead in Different Strokes. Different Strokes premiered in 1978, the same year that Maude ended, and featured Bain as Philip Drummond, a wealthy white businessman who adopts 2 African-American boys from Harlem after their mother, who was his housekeeper, passes away. The show became a massive hit and ran for 8 seasons, making Bain a household name in a way that his supporting role on Maude never quite did. His character on Different Strokes was completely different from Dr. Arthur Harmon, trading in the sardonic conservative neighbor for a warm, progressive father figure dealing with the challenges of raising his newly blended family. This kind of agreement between producers and actors wasn't particularly common in television at the time, and it shows how much the producers valued Bain's work on Maude and wanted to reward his loyalty to the show throughout its entire run. It's also a testament to how well Bain had proven himself as a reliable television actor who could carry a series, even though he had spent 6 years in what was essentially a supporting role on someone else's show. Fact 14. The show launched 2 spin-offs.
People don't get divorced every day, do they, girls? I wish I hadn't said that.
The character of Florida Evans, played by Esther Roll, was introduced at the very beginning of Maude's first season as the Findlay family's housekeeper, and she quickly became one of the most beloved characters on the show, despite technically being in a supporting role. Florida was a no-nonsense black woman who often had the last laugh at Maude's expense, particularly when Maude would awkwardly and conspicuously try to demonstrate how open-minded and liberal she was, which sometimes made Florida consider quitting altogether. Florida's popularity with audiences was so strong that in 1974, she became the star of her own series called Good Times, which focused on her life with her family in Chicago rather than working as a housekeeper in New York. This made television history in a particularly interesting way, because Maude itself was already a spin-off from All in the Family, where Bea Arthur had first appeared as Edith Bunker's outspoken cousin. This meant that Maude became the first show ever to be a spin-off that then created its own spin-off, establishing a 3-generation family tree of Norman Lear sitcoms. The transition was written into Maude through a second-season episode called Florida's Goodbye, where Florida's husband Henry, played by John Amos, gets a promotion at his job, allowing Florida to quit working for Maude and become a full-time housewife. However, there were some continuity changes between the shows, including the fact that Florida's husband was renamed James Evans for Good Times, with Henry being explained as the name of James's long-lost father, showing how the spin-off needed to make its own creative adjustments. Fact 15. Maude's voice was a running gag.
Maude, what are you doing with that?
Oh, in case it gets cold in here, I intend to use it as a muff.
Bea Arthur had one of the most distinctive voices in television history, with a deep, raspy quality that was immediately recognizable, and completely unlike what most people expected to hear from a woman, especially in the 1970s, when female characters on sitcoms typically had much higher-pitched, more conventionally feminine voices. The writers of Maude recognized that Arthur's unique vocal qualities could be turned into a source of comedy throughout the series, and they made her distinctive voice into an occasional comic foil that played on people's expectations and assumptions. One of the most memorable examples of this running gag appeared in an episode where Maude answers the telephone and has to explain to the confused person on the other end of the line, "No, this is not Mr. Findlay, this is Mrs. Findlay. Mr. Findlay has a much higher voice." This joke worked on multiple levels because it not only acknowledged the unusual nature of Arthur's voice, but also playfully suggested that her husband Walter actually had a higher, more stereotypically masculine voice than she did, which inverted the normal expectations about how husbands and wives were supposed to sound. The show never treated Arthur's voice as something to be embarrassed about or hide, but instead embraced it as part of what made Maude such a unique and memorable character. In a television landscape where most female leads were expected to conform to certain standards of femininity, including in how they sounded, Arthur's deep voice became a symbol of Maude's refusal to fit into conventional molds, making it perfectly suited for a character who challenged social norms and expectations in just about every other aspect of her life as well.